This week, Emmett interviews artist J.H. Williams on working with Alan Moore on the early 2000s series Promethea, and gets his feelings on DC's recent revival of the character. First, I'd like to thank our patrons for keeping this show going. Join them at patreon.com/deconcomics. If Patreon isn't in your budget, you can also send a one-time donation of any amount via PayPal to donate@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support. This is Tim, and this is Deconstructing Comics.
Hello, this is Emmett for Deconstructing Comics, and you may remember that a few weeks ago we had a dedicated episode, myself and Kumar, where we talked about Promethea, a 32-issue series from Wildstorm ABC back in the day. And after we released that episode, we received a tweet from Mr. J.H. Williams III saying, "Oh, it would be nice to be able to contribute to this conversation." So we invited him onto the show. And here he is.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Very glad to have you on. Now, on the show, we mentioned that you, before Promethea, that you did Batman. I'd say you've done a few Batman books, and I saw you did Chase as well. But I'd forgotten you did Desolation Jones, which actually I really loved also. It's bleak sci-fi spy story. And most recently, you also released a anthology through Image, Where We Live, which I picked up a few months ago. So congratulations on that coming out. Is this your first?
Thanks.
That's your. And now that was to raise money for the shooting in Las Vegas last year.
Yes. Yeah. And it was quite a daunting task.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It ended up being much more work than we anticipated. I mean, we knew it'd be a lot of work, but it's putting together something like that is, I guess not just because the amount of work, but the emotions involved in it, you know.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, it was very worthy too, so because it's not just a piece of work. You're trying to do it for a cause, so that can bring a lot with it.
Yeah. And fortunately, my wife and I, Wendy, had good assistance from editor Will Dennis and our assistant Michael Perlman. Without them, she and I just would not have been able to really pull it off. So, and of course, all the creators who decided that they wanted to participate was astounding.
Very good. Well, congratulations. It's out now, so folks listening, you can pick it up. Now, as I mentioned, you replied to the podcast tweet when we sent it out there. I guess we should offer you the right of reply. What did we get wrong in our discussion of Promethea?
I couldn't even remember everything that was said. So, I can't answer. You'd have to refresh me of some of the discussion.
Well, I'd like to give myself a black mark because at a certain point we were trying to talk about some of the other collaborators that you worked on Promethea, and one of the names he threw out there was somebody else who did an art issue. There was somebody else who contributed art, and the name we eventually landed on was P. Craig Russell. But of course, it wasn't P. Craig Russell.
Oh, right. Charles, are you thinking of Charles Vess? Or
that's Charles Vess, yeah. Because it was the association with Neil Gaiman that we were confused on, and that same fairy tale style, and that's where we got lost in the weeds. But that was something that on re-listening to the show, I was like, oh no.
That's pretty funny. But at the same time, I know perhaps P. Craig Russell did draw some Promethea pages in some other reality because it would make sense.
Maybe he did. Yeah. And can I just as well? I remember when I first read the series, and I was first going through each issue, and when the the journey through the different Sephiroth began. I think it was one of the early issues. You make a small cameo in there along with Alan Moore. You're meeting at the train station, and it's just a lovely little moment in the comic.
Yes.
It's just sort of, again, capturing the process of collaboration, but also, let's just throw ourselves in there, and the fact that you are on this sort of outer realm of the materia where, as creators, you also exist in this place. That's how I read it anyway.
Yeah. I mean, for one, we had actually never physically met before, so it was a bit of cheeky fun, but, it was also, I don't know, I guess the things that we were talking about in terms of creation and the exploration of alternate reality, it made sense for us, since we were talking about it, to be inside of it. And then, and then at the end of the series, we do it again where we're outside of it, which I think is kind of interesting, that Alan decided to do that, where in the Apocalypse storyline, where there's a brief moment where we see Alan looking over his shoulder at the reader, and in the background you can see his word processor.
Yes.
And on the screen of the word processor is a script for that page. And then the next panel is me drawing that page.
Yes.
So, it's so it's interesting that we were kind of inside had these cameos inside the imagination, and then outside of it as we're kind of saying everything is going to change and become something else, And
it also sort of demonstrates a very personal investment on both your part and Moore's, that this is not simply we're creating and we're putting out into the world. It's almost like continuing investment in the work. You are inside the work itself,
Yes.
So I guess that is my segue to what was the actual process of collaboration on this like, because it's such a dense book, and I see you never actually met. It's usually one of the things they advise people, if you want to collaborate, you should actually meet and just meet face to face and have a conversation. That's what I've heard. That's the way to go. But more and more people are remotely collaborating. But how did you find working on something like this, which was just full of so many references and so many visual cues that you had to then bring in?
Yeah, I mean, it was really quite challenging. And it was strange that, with Alan being so far away from us here in the United States, that we couldn't meet face to face. I'm sure we could have if we had decided to fly to England. But we ended up actually meeting face to face. Well after the series was over, we ended up making a trip out that way. But the collaboration process, I mean, at least we could speak on the phone. And quite often, particularly during the Kabbalah Quest storyline, is where things got really interesting in terms of our conversations, because he would kind of discuss with me what that chapter was going to be about, and then I would, based on things that we were talking about, would try to figure out, I wonder what we could do artistically that would kind of set that into a different headspace visually. And so we would talk about it, and then that would end up in the script. So it was pretty interesting. And then as far as the crazy layouts and stuff, about 50% of those ideas are Alan and 50% are mine. And then as far as the dealing with all the esoteric references and kind of, on the French material, I actually had to rely on my wife, Wendy, a lot to do research for me while I kept drawing. Because if I stopped to do all the research myself, I mean, we'd probably still be working on that book. So yeah, it got to a point where, Alan in his scripts, because quite often he would address, his artist by name in his scripts. It got to a point where he would actually be mentioning her by name because he understood that she was doing a lot of the reference. She would go through the scripts before I read them and sort of highlight key pieces of information that she knew would be pertinent, and then would help me find whatever visual references we needed.
It sounds like
a lot of work.
It sounds like a conversation that was going from the page to the phone and then back to the page again. Just this sort of long form conversation.
Yeah, especially, and it was kind of daunting sometimes because when Alan first started writing the series, it was very much full scripts were delivered before I started drawing them for the whole issue. And then it quickly devolved to where I was only getting a few pages at a time when I needed them. But it ended up being kind of tricky sometimes. So like by the time we were on issue 12, which is the psychedelic exploration of the tarot, I guess you could say, we had discussed that as being one long kind of, if you set all the pages side by side, if you took it apart and set all the pages side by side, it's one long strip. And so we knew we were going to do that well in advance. But then I was still getting the pages only a couple at a time, which was interesting because in order to make it feel like it's flowing, you kind of want to know what's coming up sometimes. And so I remember working on that and calling Alan and say, hey, I'm starting these pages here. What happens on the next page? So I know, so I can figure out how to link it up. And he's like, I don't know. I haven't written it yet. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll just wing it. And it's pretty fascinating that he wrote most of the series in that form because it feels so incredibly orchestrated. I guess it just shows the brilliance of how his mind can work, and I had to kind of just run with that. After that work on Promethea, I kind of did my best to avoid working on scripts that way because I felt like I never felt like I wanted to be puzzle solving. Oh wait, I did this on this page, but it doesn't now work with the page on page 20, or how do I make page 20 relate to page 3? I would like to be able to figure that out in advance now. So like when we did Sandman Overture with Neil, that was all scripts in advance, full on, because I wanted to make sure I could hit those notes the way I wanted to.
Yeah. And it's funny you bring up like that issue 12. That's the one when we did our discussion. Kumar was just flabbergasted that you did it at all. Like he just seemed that he just kept returning to this point where he was going, I don't know how they did it. I don't know how they did it.
Well, that's how we pieced it together as we went. It's funny. It's interesting because the original publication idea for that issue was for it to be an accordion fold-out.
Right.
DC was like, no, we're not going to do that. And we're like, oh, okay. And when there was discussion of doing Promethea, the Immateria edition, where we were going to change everything to be landscaped for publication, there was talk of actually doing that issue as it was originally intended to be presented. And DC sent me a photo of a mock-up that they made of how long it would be, and it would be 16 feet. I wish we had done that.
There's a sense of you folks working within these confines of the series, but then just wildly improvising as you go. Like there's a sense of restriction and then absolute freedom at the same time.
Yes, and I think that's important because if you don't allow yourself to have that kind of flexibility, even though you have something very particular in mind for the goals, I feel like creatively you're going to run into problems if you don't allow yourself to have that room to, I don't know, step to the right when originally you were talking about stepping to the left. And I've kind of done that ever since working on Promethea. Every project I've been involved in, even ones that I write myself, I'll write it one way, but then when I go to draw it, I'll end up doing something different.
All the writers out there going, "Oh, yes."
As long as I kind of feel like as long as the story itself isn't being changed, and you're just finding new ways to present the scene that you hadn't considered, before, is basically what I think needs to happen, and it allows the material to feel like it's always evolving, I guess.
Yeah, and there is this sort of exchange of ideas happening that isn't bound to the words on the page. There's a sense of, no, you can actually take flight from this and go somewhere else.
Yes, and that was the interesting thing working with Alan as well, because, as you know, he's notoriously famous for his dense scripts.
Someone say didactic.
And he would go through, these very lengthy descriptions about what he wants to see on the page and how he thinks it can function. But by the end of it, he would just simply say, "Well, if you see it differently, go for it."
Yeah.
And I very early on, I found that he trusted me that was for real. He trusted me to do that. So, I would call the first few times I would call him and like, "Oh, I've got this different idea from what you were writing." And he would just like, "It's yours, do it," So that was pretty fascinating, to have that kind of freedom, while still being delivered material that's so detail oriented. But it gave me the confidence to feel like I could really push myself and push things in ways that might be unexpected, I guess.
And just on that point as well, because we were talking about all the different sources you're able to introduce to Promethea, because you've got this vast canvas of it's the land of imagination and you can do literally anything.
Yes.
One of the things I really enjoyed were the different cover pastiches and sometimes interior pastiches that you introduced to the series. So I mentioned to you in our correspondence your Van Gogh cover, and then also the Winsor McCay issues, the little Nemo pastiches with little Promethea, whatever that character's name was. How did you find that? Like, how did you find adapting your style to fit these other illustrators from the past?
I feel like it was. I treated it like a class. It was a learning experience. So, and that's something I took with me ever since then into all my other works as well. And it also taught me that the way something is illustrated stylistically can actually either comment on what you're trying to say in the story or what you're trying to evoke emotionally from the story. And I think that's an interesting thought. And therefore, everything I've done since, I've toyed with styles depending on different scenes and attitudes, or maybe a direct reference to something, because it has that kind of psychological impact on the reader. Even if they don't even realize the reference, it still has some sort of resonance that makes them feel differently or makes them feel something particular about that sequence, even though the sequence before it was illustrated differently. And so those Promethea covers kind of was an opening gate for that, I guess, where I could kind of look at art, particularly because Promethea, since she was the goddess of imagination, it's also, the goddess of art. And so that kind of like, well, let's go look at everything. What can we learn from that? How does that speak to what we're saying? And Todd Klein had a big part in that too. So some of the cover ideas for the homages were presented by him as well, to see what we could do with that.
I'm particularly fond of is the romance cover as well. That with all the hearts descending. Yeah. I love that one. It's just great.
Yeah, that one's so much fun.
And you're right as well, because Promethea, I guess, nominally starts out as a superhero title, or at least riffing on superhero themes, and then it becomes so much more. And we talk about the literary references, we talk about the magic references, the esoterica. But the use of visual references and these sort of cues to other illustrators or other artists down through the years, that feels like a broadening of what this genre can do, because sometimes superhero art is very limited to certain house styles or certain traditions, or like we all know the artists who follow in the Kirby tradition, and they meet. But Kirby himself was an innovator. He would be introducing himself lots of different things, but now there's this sort of literal approximation of that, and what has become a house style.
Right. I don't like anything that sometimes limitations can be good, because then you can look for, well, because of these limits, how do I find the ingenuity in that? But at the same time, I don't like doors being closed to visual ideas. And I think that, I don't know, there's no reason why superhero comics can't do that. So
yeah, no, I think of I know we only had him for a short time, but Seth Fisher's work.
Oh yes.
Like his Fantastic Four story in Japan, which blew my mind. I remember picking up and I was like, what is happening? This is amazing.
Yeah.
And again, he stuffed every panel with all these different things, and it just was so exciting. But still, it was a superhero book. It was recognizably a superhero book. These are recognizably the superheroes we knew, but he was doing some incredible work within that confine.
Yes, I feel like he somehow managed to, I don't know, even though he's doing these superhero stories, he managed to ignore the fact that it was a superhero story at the same time as doing a superhero story, which was really fascinating. And then the visual ideas that came out of him had this really strange and wonderful marriage between, say, European artists like Mobius and Japanese influenced manga. Even though the manga influence isn't necessarily so evident, it becomes evident in how poppy it could be. Amazing stuff. I've got one of his covers on my wall.
Oh wow! Which one?
Yeah, it's one of the Legends of the Dark Knight stories that the one that he and I worked on together, that I helped write for him.
Yeah,
it's one of the Batman snow covers. It's the one where Batman's he's looking in from a window, and on the floor is a little tiny snow globe. It's cool.
Oh, wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I remembered that you'd worked on that, but I'd forgotten that you'd collaborated with Seth Fisher as well. So I just brought that in apropos of nothing. I just what you were talking about reminded me of him. I was just a similar approach, and then I had forgotten that you had actually worked on that book together. Okay, so but speaking of, again, that sort of artistic ambition, and even what you were saying before about the different production ideas, the accordion style comic, you did pull off a feat with the very last issue, which is I refer to as the lecture issue, where Promethea addresses us again, the reader, and walks us through this history of science and magic and a bunch of other stuff. And I remember buying the 2 copies of the issue and then having one to somehow read, and then taking the other one apart and then just sticking it all over my wall so I could just sort of admire it.
Did you ever try reading it in poster form?
Yeah. So I literally just covered my wall and I just read it like that.
It's an interesting thing that ended up happening there, and it's not so evident until you do put it together, in that
the face,
there's little connecting points that you didn't realize were there. If you follow the little trails, you're like, oh wait, that trail from up at the top follows down along this way and comes down to the bottom, and when you read just that thread, there's actually connecting thought tissue between all of that. So it's almost like the whole thing, even though it's very cosmic and celestial, it also feels almost like, the way the human brain works, how one thought can lead to another and you're not quite sure, oh wait, how did those two thoughts connect? Pretty wild stuff. That ended up surprisingly being the fastest issue of Promethea that I did. I think I did that whole issue in 3 weeks, maybe.
Wow.
It was incredibly fast. Oh, I guess because the way it was done, it was sort of this cobbled together thing.
Yeah.
Where you're taking those illustrations and laying them on top of a painting, and then letting the painting be abstract enough that you're not quite sure what you're looking at until you put all the pieces together, so.
Yeah. And it was also your swan song. So this is like your last Promethea. So, everything that's gone before is going to go into this. Like, this is almost like a final declaration of intent. This is what we're doing here.
Yeah. I remember being quite emotional when it was all finished, when it was all done and put together, and it was quite an emotional experience.
Coming up, whatever happened to the Immateria edition of Promethea, the definition of the phrase the end of the world, and J.H. Williams' thoughts on the recent return of the character Promethea in Justice League. First, don't forget, one way you can help this podcast is by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
I'm Batman.
And I'm Robin.
This is Tim.
And this is Paul. To the Bat Polls!
The iTunes reviews are in on To the Bat Polls podcast. These guys do a good job, writes Acello. Who knew that the Batman TV show was such a wellspring of insight into Hollywood trivia, 60s counterculture, sexual mores, and even musical analysis? The Young brothers know their stuff, says Professor Allen. It is a great mix of nostalgia, analysis, and fun. Highly recommended. You've heard the reviews, now try it for yourself. New episodes on the first, third, and fifth Thursdays of the month on iTunes or Stitcher, or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com.
Batman, the answer to a policeman's prayer.
For nostalgia, analysis, and fun, it's
To the Bat Polls.
Something Kumar mentioned in the episode that I hadn't heard before was that there were plans to, I think similar to what you described before with the landscape, but that there were plans to have an absolute edition of Promethea in landscape as well. That it would be this tome, and you just like flip it open and just read it that way.
Yes, yeah, that was going to be the Immateria edition,
right?
And I'm not quite sure why that still hasn't happened. I actually saw a dummy copy of it that was made to show Wendy and I what it would look like, how big it would be. And I think the book weighed like 15 pounds or something like that. And so plans were moving forward with it. And then, Sandman Overture happened. And the idea was that I would do roughly 8 covers worth of new illustrations for the Immateria edition, but the schedule on Sandman Overture got so out of hand that everyone's like, oh, well, let's not give you anything else to distract you.
Right.
from
Okay.
Sandman, and we'll get this done when Sandman is over. Well, then when Sandman was over, nothing happened for whatever reason. They didn't move forward with the Immateria edition, which was quite frustrating for me, particularly because they had said, yes, we're going to do it. I'd seen the dummy copy. I'd seen the accordion fold out for issue 12, that sort of stuff, So people would get to see the material, some of the material in the way we originally wanted it to be seen, and then getting to see the material for those who had the other editions would be a whole new experience because it's landscaped. Every 2 pages are now a single page. So you can imagine, the different effect it would have, say, on the Van Gogh issue, as an example. All those pages link up as well, kind of like issue 12, but we didn't set out to make it an accordion fold out. We wanted to do it for the flow. So imagine getting to see that in the landscape format, where you're actually seeing 4 pages sit side by side. Then that connective aspect would be much more evident. It would create a different reading experience, I think, for a lot of the issues in there.
Yeah. And it's a real shame as well, because, number one, that is something I want on my shelf. I want that in my home. And
Me too.
Definitely, that sounds like a really amazing reading experience. But even still, when I start from the beginning and go all the way through to the end, and I talked about this in the episode with Kumar as well, but I have my associations with the first time I read them in the issues. I remember all those years back. I have those memories still, but I also have this sense of revelation each time I read it, because I discover new things every time I read Promethea, and if I have the full set, I don't stop reading. I keep reading until I finish, because I'm being sort of impelled forward. It's like, no, you have to get going. You have to get going. And I remember at the time of release, though, like we still had early comic criticism on the internet. That's not quite to the extent it is today, where it's so widespread. But there were some dedicated comics review sites online at the time, and I do remember a lot of frustration on the reviewers' part when they're saying, "Okay, when's this lecture going to end?" Whereas reading it now, it's a thrill for me to get through it. I love the lecture, because it's like, no, we're going to be following an idea for this amount of time, and we're going to do every possible variation of this idea, and then we're going to go back to the story. But I look forward to the lecture. It's an interesting sequence.
Right. Yeah, in some ways, I kind of feel like it was one of the last comics to actually decide to give you something that was unexpected. And even the sections where it becomes more of an educational aspect to it, I still feel like the story is still very much front and center, because it's about, you can't get to the end, you can't get to the apocalypse storyline without knowing that information that happens in the middle. It doesn't work. And I think if it had been written in a way where you just kind of like glossed over that centerpiece and jumped to, oh, well, this is actually about the end of the world, you're going to be like, okay, so why?
Yeah.
When all the stuff in the middle gives you, an understanding of, well, this gives you the building blocks of why reality needs to change, and how our viewpoints of reality can affect change, rather than just, oh, here's the change. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, the whole series wouldn't work without it.
Yeah, it gives you that investment, and because it's an intellectual investment as well as an emotional investment, it's not as throwaway.
Yes.
It's not just another apocalypse.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think the best comics that I appreciate from reading comics all my life are the ones that I feel like I was learning something from it. Those are the ones that you're going to remember. Those are the ones that you're going to stick with, and not, wait, what did Superman do last week? That sort of, and because of that, I think even though Promethea isn't this giant, massive cultural hit, I think it's going to stand the test of time because of what it's saying and what it's doing. Even though it's very much set in the time that it was written, all the politics involved in that are mentioned in there are very much set in that time. But when you read them and you look at what it's saying about those events, it's still shockingly relevant. To what's happening today.
You declare the world will begin to end 2017, and that was pretty grim reading that. Just a few months ago, I was reading it going, oh no, he called it.
Yes. But what's fascinating about the end of the world, according to the doctrine of Promethea, is that the end of the world isn't the destruction of the world; it's the transformation of it.
Yeah.
So it's that's the other thing I think is super fascinating about what Alan did there is he builds up this grand sense of dread and that everything is just going to be destroyed, and then the apocalypse happens and you wake up the next morning. That's quite different than what most apocalyptic stories do. Most of them, it's like, no, it's death and destruction and the end of everything that in a physical sense, where this is the end of everything that from a psychological sense and a metaphysical sense that things will change.
Yeah, and I mentioned in the episode as well that I saw this as a cousin to there's an Irish novel called The Crock of Gold by James Stephens, and very similar conclusion in that the apocalypse is just the tearing down of the Christian world because it's Revelation, so you tear that down, and then this pagan world emerges from that. And when I was reading Prometheus, I was going, this is the same thing. This is this sort of a joyful, happy apocalypse, which is an interesting idea.
I hope Alan's right, and it is not the physical destruction that everyone assumes will happen. That's the fear. That's the fear, is the assumption that that's what will happen.
Yeah.
So will it become a self-fulfilling thing because that's what everyone assumes will happen?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel it's almost as if the philosophical takeaway is if we want to avoid that physical end of the world, we need to tear down all the mindsets that are leading us to that as an inevitability. Like, we need to go, well, let's just reject that idea. let's
exactly
swerve away from whatever is leading us to that, because clearly it's not to the good. And sort of on a more pleasant level as well. Your early issues, what I was referring to as the lecture, but it is the trip into the Sephiroth. Convinced me to look up A Houseboat on the Styx by John Kendrick Bangs, who then appears in Promethea as well, and that was a lovely book. I really enjoyed reading that. That was just a nice little side dish, to Promethea as well, and having all those characters and having that beautiful homage to all the characters from the book appear in Promethea as well, and they're doing the same thing they're doing in the book, where they just hang out and just make fun of each other.
Yeah, it's fascinating how much Alan does that in a lot of his works, where he puts in these references to materials that basically take you away from the material he wants you to read in his story. He's like, I want you to read my story, but I'm going to give you lots of distractions along the way. It's pretty interesting that he does that.
Yeah, and again, you've got that sense of depth, you've got that sense of investment, because you're taking stuff on, you're inheriting stuff from the text somehow.
Yes.
Okay, so here's the thing. We've been having a really pleasant chat about all this, and I don't want that to end. But I did feel I should ask your thoughts on the return of the character named Promethea recently in Justice League, and that was part of what Kumar and I originally discussed. And I more or less halted that conversation in that show, saying, "All right, let's just talk about why we like this, why this is important." Because I don't want it to become a dirge, I don't want it to be like, "Oh no, it's bad." But
right.
as co-creator, I have the opportunity to ask you, so I'm going to take it. Like, what are your thoughts on Promethea's return?
My take on it is why.
Sure.
I feel like they shouldn't have done it, in my opinion. In my conversations with them about it after the fact, because I didn't know it was happening until it was happening, was extremely frustrating. And I guess the reason why it bothers me so much is because, like you had mentioned before, this was an extremely personal work, and to just be arbitrarily used improperly as well. I just feel like it was bizarre that we weren't even informed, let alone consulted about it. And that was something I mentioned is consultation, where is something that I would have preferred to have had to make sure things are, if it's going to happen, because we don't have control over it happening or not. If it's going to happen, can we at least have some consultation to make sure it's on the right track?
Yeah.
And that was something they were unwilling to entertain, which is unfortunate. I was not thrilled about that. I tried talking with Alan about it, and he's kind of washed his hands so much of anything DC does that he's basically left it up to me on how to handle that stuff. I don't know. Did you read it?
I read it. Kumar didn't. I did. I took one for the team. But my objection to it, in a nutshell, was that as you say, it's a very personal work. Promethea itself, the series, very personal work. It was an invitation to think about some interesting ideas. We've talked a lot in this discussion about how you guys were trying to lead us down different pathways, like introduce us to different things that we maybe hadn't considered. It was an experience. It's something I really treasured. And then to have the character Promethea appear in another book and declare herself to be the goddess of imagination, or to come from the world of imagination and fight the bad guy, who is sort of a malign, fantastical creature, like the Queen of Fairies. So she's trying to invade Immateria, so Promethea is going to fight her, and the Justice League get involved, and there's a big to-do. And what I did enjoy most about the series was that the couple of issues was that Promethea actually bows out of the fight at one point and returns at the end after the heroes have defeated this evil creature, and then she says, "Oh, I had to go away because you're the protagonist of the story, so I can't be here for that." And more or less, 'cause I'm in your book now. I can't steal your thunder. This is yours. And that was the one thing I liked. Because it seemed to imply that Promethea is, even as a fictional character in another work, at least aware that she's a fictional character in another work. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but that was
Right.
that was my take.
Right. Right.
But ultimately, when it comes down to it, there's a leveling effect here, which is that this character is, and this is my opinion, I'm not speaking for anybody else, for anyone listening, this is just what I'm saying. There's a leveling effect here where this character is just like any other character that is owned and copyrighted and so on and so forth. And I reject that when it comes to Promethea, because I don't,
Right.
I don't think that is true. I think Promethea exists in a series of 32 issues, and that's about it. The story had a beginning, middle, and end, and it was told. And I don't know why you would return to it. That's my impression of it.
Yeah, I feel the same way. There's it didn't seem to make any sense to do it other than it's interesting because other ABC characters cropped up around the same time, and one of the things I suspect, even though I was told otherwise, that it wasn't a mandated thing, but I suspect that perhaps the reason why they all cropped up around the same time might have been copyright issues.
That was my theory as well. That was my again, not an expert, no inside knowledge whatsoever, but just my impression was there's a certain amount of time, and then you need to reuse these properties, and then you've got them in your stable again for whatever reason.
Yeah. Otherwise, they risk losing it somehow. I just, which is fine if that's the case. That's whatever. But then, if that's the case, then let's make sure it's done in a way that makes sense. So but it is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah, I'm having fantasies of Promethea becoming a sort of Mickey Mouse type figure, in that in that, like, Disney doesn't do Mickey Mouse cartoons anymore, but Mickey Mouse is still a very protected IP. Right. So he tends to appear in different things. He tends to sort of pop up in different things, and maybe if they found a way of making Promethea, maybe he could have like a Promethea augmented reality app or something where he's
right. Well, it's interesting. I read somewhere online, when they talked about this use in Justice League, because part of Promethea, that when Alan spoke about it, is that it's very much a spell to bring on, the apocalypse, bring on the end of the world, right? And so someone mentioned, he's like, was it really wise to have brought that into the DC universe? Is that an omen for the destruction of the DC universe? And I thought that was rather entertaining. But in terms of Promethea existing in some form or another in this constant engagement with the world, I mean, there's quite a few instances that are referenced in the original work about this idea of what is Promethea has come up in other artworks and writings before Alan decided to write this. And there was stuff he discovered after he thought about doing it, and the fact that the whole concept of Promethea being this goddess who's the goddess of imagination and art, one of the things Alan thought about is this an actual entity speaking
to him,
and I, through the act of creating this comic.
Yeah.
And what reinforced his thoughts about that is, he ended up finding all these weird documentations of stuff that were similar in nature. So I think one of the references in there, I think there's some black metal band wrote a song about Promethea before we had created this comic that spoke of similar ideas. And there's also a reference in there about this. I want to say it was a religious woman who was in a court trial of some kind. There's documentation of this woman, I cannot remember her name, standing up in a courtroom, and for whatever reason started spouting that she is the goddess Promethea, the goddess of imagination and art. And then there's it's an actual historical reference.
I'll have to hunt that one down. I came across it in French poetry as well. There's a poem about Promethea in French.
Interesting.
Because I was studying French at the time, as I was reading Promethea, and then I encountered this, and I was like, oh, what's happening? It's everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, finding these things, these other references really kind of reinforce to us that, perhaps this is an actual entity that speaks to us through creativity, and therefore is inevitable to reveal itself from time to time. So, so perhaps her needing to appear in a Justice League comic was of importance in that regard.
I like that. Though. Well, sir, thank you so much for all the time, and thank you for submitting yourself to my questions on this book.
Sure.
I really hope that one good outcome potentially from all this sort of palaver that circulated the reappearance of Promethea is maybe people will read the book again, because I think it and more people will read the book that haven't read it before.
Yes. Well, there are plans. I found out that there's going to be deluxe edition hardcovers released.
Oh, beautiful.
So next year, I think they're breaking it into 3 volumes, much like the Absolute editions were. So I think the first volume is like 1 through 12. I know that's scheduled for next year.
Great.
So perhaps you're right.
Wonderful stuff. Before we go, where would you recommend people come find you?
They can find me on Twitter. And I can also be messaged at my website as well. I have a contact button there, and people can email me through there. But I'm on Twitter a lot.
Yes,
not as much as many others, but I do pay attention to people tweet at me.
You're very prompt in your replies. I was very impressed. Sent you a message and then you reply, and I was like, oh wow, I'm emailing J.H. Williams. This is extraordinary. Hello.
Well, I kind of feel like if somebody is tagging me on there because you're trying to draw my attention to something, or they're talking to me directly, there's no reason for me not to reply to them. Right.
It's very much appreciated.
Yeah. So let me know if you ever want to do this again.
Of course.
We can.
Happy to. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
J.H. Williams' website is jhwilliams3.com. He's on Twitter at jhwilliamsIII. Here at deconstructingcomics.com, we produce Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Bat Poles. If you like our shows and want to support them, pledge at patreon.com/deconcomics. Help us make our next goal and unlock more vintage episodes. Also, please help us get noticed by reviewing us on Apple or any other podcast source. We'd really appreciate it if you gave us a star rating there and a short review. Even if it's just a sentence, tell the world why you enjoy Deconstructing Comics. Another way to show your appreciation is simply to write to us. Email us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or contact us through social media. Find all the links on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. We're also on the Comics Podcast Network at comicspodcasts.com and on comiccon.com, where our new episodes usually go up on the Friday before they appear in our feed. Our theme is from bensound.com. Last Thursday on To the Batpoles, we discuss an unfilmed script based on another unfilmed script. Our previously discussed script Fashions in Crime by Peggy Shaw was rewritten by Stephen Kandel as The Cat's Tale. What changes did he make? Did he solve problems with the script or create them? Listen to the Batpoles in its own podcast feed on Apple Podcasts or other podcast apps, or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our bi-weekly spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. The next episode will appear next Monday. Then in 2 weeks on this show, Kumar and Emmett discuss Saga by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.